It was supposed to be a simple celebration, a quiet dinner, balloons, cake, just the four of us. Ethan had just turned 18, a milestone, but as I stood at the sink, my hands in the soapy water, something felt off in the dining room. Laughter echoed, almost rehearsed. David, my husband, was glued to his phone as always. From the outside, we looked happy, but inside, I felt like a ghost wandering through a life that no longer held me. Ethan had always been thoughtful, perhaps too aware of the silence that lived between us. That day at the beach, as the sun beat down, I watched him toss a ball with effortless joy. When he passed me the sunscreen and offered to help, it wasn't the act, but the attention that took me by surprise. It wasn't the gesture, but the reminder of care, of presence, that caught me off guard. I hadn't felt seen in so long, not truly. It wasn't about love or longing, it was about being seen. About not fading away, that I existed, that I mattered. In Jack, I saw a reflection of the laughter I'd lost, and for a brief moment, that was enough to keep me afloat. The remnants of what her husband had left behind lingered in the air, a haunting reminder of love lost and memories etched in every corner of their shared life. A whirlwind of thoughts consumed me as I pondered the implications this could hold for our future. Yet, the family gathering I had meticulously orchestrated swiftly descended into a somber affair. As we sank into the warm sand, our laughter danced through the air, while the sounds of others reveling faded into a distant murmur. A deep sense of distance enveloped me, as if an unseen tide had surged through my soul, erasing every trace of joy that once thrived within. The oppressive stillness compelled me to confront a harsh reality. The flame I had desperately sought had flickered out, leaving only an echo of its warmth behind. David trudged home, exhaustion weighing heavily on his shoulders. His spirit dulled and his interest faded into the shadows. He stood at a crossroads, the wind swirling around him, a storm rising in the distance. The weight of his choices loomed large, safety on one side, uncertainty on the other. A storm brewing in the distance. His heart raced as he stared into the unknown, a gnawing void stretching before him. It wasn't death that called, but the echo of a life unlived and the fear of what he'd already lost, with an eerie allure. Every instinct screamed for him to turn back, yet something deeper urged him forward into the unknown. The air crackled with tension, and in that moment, he felt both terrified and exhilarated, caught between the safety of the familiar and the thrill of the adventure that lay ahead. He didn't greet me, inquire about my day, or express any concern for his son. The weight of his absence pressed down on me as I sat alone at the kitchen table. The silence echoing around me, it had lost its gentle touch. The heaviness clung to me. I wasn't gone, just invisible, fading slowly into the background of his busy world, a mere whisper in the cacophony of his daily routine. Something he could effortlessly overlook. As I stood before the vacant desk, shadows of forgotten, grim memories flooded my mind. Frustration coursed through me as I reflected on how I had allowed everything to spiral out of control. Shadows of my past flickered in my mind, but the essence of the woman I once was eluded me, slipping through my fingers like sand. The woman, brimming with pride for her family, cast a long shadow over me. There are days when I no longer recognize myself. The woman who once held her head high with pride in her family, she feels like a fading photograph now, slipping through my fingers like sand. I don't know exactly when I lost her. Maybe it was in the silence of a hollow marriage, in the vacant glances of a husband always too busy to care. That night, as we all sat together, I looked at Jack, his eyes, so focused on every word I said. Not because he was different or special, but because, for a moment, I felt visible again. I wasn't yearning to be adored. I just wanted to feel real, to feel seen. The next day, we walked along the shore. The sun burned gently on our skin and the waves whispered truths I had long buried. It wasn't Ethan who changed me. It wasn't anything he did or said. It was the realization that I had been absent from my own life for far too long. A storm brewed inside me, not caused by romance or desire, but by the truth. I had spent years being a background character in my own story. Ethan wasn't my salvation. He was merely a mirror, reflecting back the version of me I thought I had lost. I looked back at David. His silhouette stretched beneath the sun, distant and worn, but for the first time, I didn't chase after it. I didn't ache. I didn't wait. I simply knew it was time to move forward, with myself, for myself, little boy I once knew. He was growing up right before my eyes. He appeared adrift in a realm of his own, seated in the passenger seat, headphones enveloping his ears, his gaze fixed on the passing scenery outside the window. The realization struck me like a silent wave. He was no longer the little boy I once carried on my hip. He was growing up right before my eyes. In the car, Ethan sat beside me, headphones on, lost in his own world. His gaze wandered through the window, watching the blur of trees, buildings, and sky as if he were drifting somewhere far away, somewhere I couldn't follow. And yet, I saw flickers of the past in him. I remembered how his tiny hand used to grasp mine so tightly, how his laughter once echoed through our home, untamed and bright. When we arrived at the beach, there was a quiet understanding between us. No words, just motion. I laid out the towels across the warm sand while Ethan planted the umbrella beside me, shielding us from the blazing sun. It was ordinary, but something in that moment felt sacred, like a memory quietly writing itself. I sat down slowly, letting the sun wrap around me, not as a lover, not as a thrill, but like a memory you let rest on your skin. The scent of sunscreen stirred something inside, a reminder of years long gone. I looked at him again, now taller, quieter, more distant, and wondered what thoughts stirred behind that steady gaze. I didn't want to pull him closer. I just wanted to reach him gently. But there was hesitation in him, a wall I couldn't name. When I asked for help, his response was reluctant, distracted, not out of defiance, but uncertainty. As he moved near and passed me the towel, our hands brushed. Just a brief touch, nothing more. And yet, it reminded me how much time had passed, and how little I knew this version of him. There was no tension, only space. A growing space between the mother I used to be, and the young man he was becoming. A space filled with memories I couldn't relive, and questions I didn't know how to ask. The realization hit me all at once, sudden, like a crashing wave in the middle of calm seas. He wasn't a boy anymore. He wasn't mine in the way he used to be. I watched Ethan as we arrived at the beach, quiet, thoughtful, carrying his weight and mine without needing to be asked. There was a silence in him that I couldn't reach, and yet I felt it pressing against the silence in me. We spread the towels under the shimmering sun. The breeze off the sea was gentle, almost sacred. It felt like the world had slowed down and I could finally breathe. I remembered the softness of his laughter when he was small, how his tiny hand would wrap around my finger. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, just to make sure he was still breathing in the dark. But now, he sat beside me, older, distant, yet kind, and I felt it. Not desire, not longing, but grief. For time, for innocence, for the pieces of myself I had scattered over the years and forgotten to reclaim. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth of the sun soak into my skin like something familiar, something I hadn't felt in a long while. Not love, not safety, just stillness. When I asked Ethan for help, he hesitated, not because he didn't care, but because he wasn't sure how close he was allowed to be anymore. We were both learning new shapes, his into adulthood, mine into whatever came after motherhood. Our hands brushed briefly as we moved the umbrella into place. It meant nothing and everything. A reminder of time, a whisper of change. I said thank you. He nodded, and that was enough. In that very moment, something shifted inside me, a quiet, undeniable pulse that stirred beneath the weight of years. I stood alone on the empty shore. Everything I had once clung to scattered like driftwood behind me, but Jack, silent and steady, was still there, not as a rescuer, but as a reminder that life was still moving, that even broken pieces could shimmer in the right light. His presence beside me, quiet and grounded, was like an anchor, not one that held me down, but one that kept me steady in the storm of my own thoughts. When our eyes met, I didn't see desire or salvation. I saw understanding, a mirrored ache. I didn't need to be touched. I needed to be witnessed, to be seen in my unraveling and not turned away. And in that, something opened, not romance, not escape, but a door into a version of myself I had forgotten existed. A version I was finally ready to return to. That longing settled into the stillness, not as a desire, but as a deep ache for connection, for meaning in a world that had grown too noisy to hear our hearts. I opened my eyes and met Jack's gaze. For a breath, the world went quiet, not because of love or longing, but because in that rare pause, we saw each other for who we had become. We stood together on the beach, not as parent and child trying to escape reality, but as two people caught in the current of time, tethered not by romance, but by the weight of shared silence. That picnic wasn't a secret. It was a reprieve, a stillness where words weren't needed and the ocean told our story better than either of us could. I didn't want to stop time. I only wanted to feel present, to remember what mattered beyond work, noise, and loneliness, as the sun dipped low and the chill returned to the breeze. I knew we had to go home, but I carried with me a small, unspoken peace, and that was enough. It crept up on me, relentless and chilling, like a cold that refused to fade. As Ethan and I slid into the car, an unsettling sense of inevitability settled over me. As though fate had already drawn its line in the sand, the city blurred past as we drove, and my thoughts spiraled into a maze, trying and failing to distance myself from the ache that lingered deep inside. With every turn of the wheels, the barrier around my heart thinned, and a quiet dread whispered that home no longer felt safe. When we finally arrived, I stepped into a familiar emptiness, that dull, heavy silence that David had cast over our lives. Pressing in on all sides like walls without windows, the door creaked open, and the weight of the house seemed to press against my chest. The air inside was still, not with peace, but with the kind of silence that hums too loud. David was there, as expected, sitting in the same worn chair, his laptop screen illuminating his face like a dim spotlight, casting shadows beneath tired eyes that hadn't really looked at me in years. He didn't turn. He never did. "You're back early," he muttered, not lifting his gaze. No warmth. No curiosity. Just a script he had memorized long ago. The performance of a husband. I stood frozen, bag still clutched in my hand, heart thudding like a clock counting down. Ethan slipped quietly past me, vanishing down the hallway with the quiet grace of someone used to walking through tension. For a moment, I considered saying something. Anything. To break the numbness. To scream, to cry, to beg, but instead, I just watched him, this man I once loved, this stranger I now shared a roof with, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or grief. I felt absence. A hollow space where something sacred used to live. A space he had abandoned, and I had protected alone for far too long. I turned away, not out of fear, but because there was nothing left to say. His absence shaped everything. David drifted through the house like a shadow, speaking aloud while immersed in tasks, as if no one else existed. He moved through the kitchen mechanically, the clatter of utensils echoing more than his words ever did. I watched him fade in real time. Each time he turned away, a quiet frustration burned inside me. "David, are you hungry again?" I asked, trying to keep the evening from collapsing. His smile was a flicker, brief, empty, followed by a nod that said more than words could. That night, lying awake in bed, my thoughts drifted. I found myself reflecting on the differences between what once was and what had become. Ethan, present, attentive, had become a mirror I didn't ask for, not of desire, but of what I was missing: connection, attention, being seen. I tried to silence the noise in my head, to push away the ache of needing something more, but in the quiet, those unmet needs found their voice. I missed being known, and though I fought to ground myself in reason, I couldn't ignore the emotional void growing wider each day. The air between us thickened with silence, not hostile, but heavy with things neither of us could say. Jack's quiet presence lingered like a thought unfinished. As I moved through the kitchen, or curled up on the couch, I occasionally caught his gaze, steady, unreadable. One evening, as I let the flickering television distract me, I felt him watching, not in a way that demanded answers, but like someone trying to understand the shape of something lost. I didn't look away. I didn't speak. We simply sat in the stillness, the heat of the weekend settling around us like a second skin. Maybe I longed for the beach, not because of the place, but because of what it represented. Space, breath, a pause from the weight of everything else. Ethan said nothing during the drive, lost in his music. His face turned toward the window. I focused on the road, trying to name the unease pressing against my chest. In the kitchen, the scent of coffee and warm toast wrapped around me like memory. I smiled, not because things were right, but because they had once been familiar. David passed by, brushing a kiss on my cheek, a gesture so practiced, so fleeting, it barely lingered. He vanished into his day like he always did, and I stood alone, listening to the echo of his absence, The sound of footsteps faded down the stairs, followed by the sharp slam of the door, and just like that, I was alone in a house bathed in warm, tranquil sunlight. Ethan entered the kitchen quietly, almost weightless, like he belonged to the morning light itself. He stood by the window, still and thoughtful, his eyes tracing something far beyond the glass. When our eyes met, a quiet memory stirred, that moment on the beach when he looked at me not just with recognition, but with something deeper, presence, connection. We didn't need words. In that instant, I understood that what bound us wasn't just the label of mother and son. It was something carved through shared silence, through long winters and quiet resilience. A bond shaped by everything we'd endured together. The kitchen, so ordinary just moments ago, now felt sacred, as if time itself had paused so we could listen to the stillness between us. A love without conditions. A love that simply was. The air was heavy with heat and silence. I could sense him nearby, his presence familiar, comforting, but strangely overwhelming. Emotions surged within me, a storm I couldn't name. I wanted to speak, to set boundaries, to understand what was happening, but the moment moved too fast. He stepped closer, his eyes searching mine not with lust, but confusion, as if he, too, didn't understand why the air had changed between us, and when our hands brushed accidentally, I pulled away, heart pounding. A line had been crossed, or nearly crossed, and it left me shaken, questioning everything. This wasn't just about impulse, it was a moment that needed distance, reflection, and clarity. I turned away, knowing I had to protect what truly mattered. The truth between us, caught between overwhelming emotion and confusion. I lost sight of where safety ended and danger began. A silent storm gathered inside me, threatening to pull me away from everything I held dear. In those moments, I wasn't myself. It felt like I was running from grief, loneliness, anything to avoid facing the emptiness. Jack's presence, steady and sincere, brought memories to the surface I had long buried. It wasn't romance, it was something far more complicated. The blurred emotions that surface when boundaries aren't clearly drawn. I stood frozen, a weight pressing down on me, shame, regret, and longing tangled together. But I knew this wasn't a story about love. It was a warning, a signal that something in my life had veered off course. And it was up to me to set it right. I stepped back, letting clarity take its place where confusion had once ruled. Whatever had stirred between us, I knew one truth: some lines are meant to protect us, and they must never be crossed. There are some lines in life that, once crossed, we can never return the same. It may begin with just a glance, a single moment, a heartbeat out of rhythm, but the consequences can echo forever. I don't know if I was entirely right or completely wrong, but I do know this: holding on to what's right in the middle of a storm, that's the hardest thing, and the bravest. Maybe one day, we all face such a line between feeling and reason, between desire and morality. And when that day comes, the choice we make defines who we are. Have you ever stood at such a line? And if you did, what did you choose?